This is the ultimate question. What phone should I buy today? Not everyone has $1,000 to spend on a phone, but at, well, $1,400 new and $1,200 used, this may shock some people. It is a hard sell for sure, but the phone is special. Let's talk about it first, because it might actually be worth the price. Should you buy the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra 5G in 2020? Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review. Check out the social media listed above and the description for some extras. Alright, let's review this crazy phone. This is an awesome huge screen, as expected on a Samsung phone, but it is a little bit different than a standard Samsung screen. This 6.9-inch hole punch screen has no curves on the screen. Okay, not really. There's a very slight curve to this screen, but it's actually not that aggressive like what we've seen on something like the Galaxy S8 or Galaxy S9. This is a 1440p Dynamic AMOLED 2X Infinity O display. I know, the name is annoying, but it's a 2K AMOLED screen with a hole punch for the front camera and 120Hz refresh rate screen. But at the same time, it isn't. See, Samsung decided that only the 120Hz part will be reserved for 1080p and 720p resolutions, while 1440p only gets 60Hz. With this said, only the 720 part looks bad. It's weird watching 1080p videos though, because the scale just looks kind of bad and the pixel density is somewhere like 382 pixels per inch, while the 2K resolution is 511 pixels per inch. This means you essentially get an iPhone 6 Plus pixel density, but at 120Hz. Cool, but the people that want 120Hz on their $1,400 phone might be slightly disappointed. With this said, I had no issue with the screen at either resolution, but I did choose to stick with 1440p, even though there's 90Hz on my OnePlus 7 Pro. The 2K resolution just looks much better to me, and the things powering up this phone made it feel even faster than it is, so I didn't really see too much of an issue. But the colors on the screen are amazing, as usual, and it seems to get better every year. I don't know how, but Samsung just figures it out. The screen is huge though, and some people might not like that. I have no issue with it, but one-handed usage is kind of crazy because this phone is a little bit top-heavy with those huge cameras. There is the hole punch in the screen, but I've learned to live with it. Watching videos, the left and right side black out, so the front camera kind of disappears. The phone has system-wide dark mode, so the only time you actually see the front cameras is on the main screen, but even then, it's not really that noticeable. I know this contradicts what I've said in the past, but don't worry, I still think that pop-up cameras are the best for now. As we move down the middle of the screen, you have something that, again, is supposed to be good, but isn't really that good, and that's the fingerprint scanner. It works maybe 60% of the time for me, but most of the time I just rely on the front camera to unlock my phone for this reason. Having the ultrasonic sensor should be more secure, but for me, I would take reliability over security. Because in theory, it doesn't actually add any extra security. I mean, my passcode is still a 4-digit code, which anyone can guess whether they have my finger or not. With this screen, you still have the same things as the Samsung S10, which are the always-on display, double tap to wake, and a really bright screen, one that gets even brighter in sunlight. The screen ratio is a little odd too, because the screen just keeps getting taller. It is a 20:9 ratio, which sounds fine, but a cinema screen like the Xperia 1 Mark II is a 21:9. So for those that want a tall, thin screen, this is perfect. For everyone else, this might not be your best bet. At 5,000 milliamps, you would think that this battery is pretty big and lasts long, and you wouldn't be wrong. With this said, there are a lot of things that do drain this battery. The good news is that you can actually turn most of those features off. First of all, I want to show you what I got, which isn't really that bad, and leads me to believe that you'll probably get a max of 5 to 6 hours of screen on time, which wouldn't really be too bad for this phone, and that's with 120Hz and 5G on. Now you can turn off both and get a little bit better battery life, but maybe an extra 5 to 15% depending on how you use the phone. Here are the Geekbench 4 stats for the battery, if you like seeing those. For now, I turned off 5G, no, not because I think it causes you know what, because it doesn't, but because my area doesn't really even have 5G coverage. Sure, my phone pops up and says that it does, but for now I just call it 5GE because in most places I see a smaller performance increase, but everywhere else it leaves my phone with unreliable service. Either way, I turn it off and it helps the battery life just a little bit. As for the 120Hz and 1440p, I didn't really see much of a difference, but I still left it at 1440p. You can move the screen resolution to 1080p or even 720p at 60Hz, but I don't think it's really worth the better battery life, if there is any. Now you guys gave me endless comments about my S10 Plus video, which I was confused with the S10 5G when it came to the charging specs, so here's what Samsung says, and you'll just have to deal with it. It has super fast charging at 25 watts and super fast charging 2.0 at 45 watts. This is all from Samsung, so blame them if they're wrong. As for the charging time, the 25 watts and 45 watt blocks can fully charge your phone in roughly an hour, so that's actually pretty awesome to see on a common US model phone. Of course, this is all done by the USB-C port on the bottom, but you can also wirelessly charge your phone, which supports up to 10 watts of wireless charging. You can also do wireless power share, just like you can on the S10 and Note 10 series. And with the 5000 mAh battery, it actually makes sense that you'd want to do that. What I like to do is get a decent charger, plug it into this phone, and charge another phone while both phones charge at the same time. It's perfect for overnight trips if you only remember your USB-C charger. For once, I found a good battery on a Samsung phone, and that's pretty awesome. Good job, Samsung. Too bad the phone cost $1,400. Generally, it's safe to say that the cameras on flagship Samsung phones are going to be over the top. Well, this year is no different, and it's kind of outrageous if you think about it. There are 5 cameras on this phone totaling 208 megapixels. That's insane. The main camera is crazy, so we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's talk about the front 40 megapixel camera. Yes, a 40 megapixel focusable camera. Shots are amazing, as you would expect, but they aren't Pixel 3 level, which is insane to me. But that's because it shoots a 10 megapixel shot. You have to switch to the 40 megapixel shot to get a better image out of the sensor. See? So this camera supports 4K at 60 frames per second on the front camera, which is amazing, just like the iPhone, but there's no focus. I don't understand why Samsung did that, because the camera can focus. Maybe a software update? I don't know. Kind of frustrating to me. They could have been better than Apple, but now they're pretty much on par with Apple. So, yeah. Another weird thing is that this sensor is bigger than 8K resolution by a couple megapixels, but it doesn't support that. That is for the back camera. Now let's flip over to the back and look at this palm phone size camera room. Yes, I'm going to call it a camera room. We have the modest 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, which has a 120 degree field of view, which is kind of weird because the Samsung S10 and Note 10s had a 16 megapixel sensor, and generally you want a larger ultra-wide sensor, but either way the sensor is kind of gimmicky to me, but it still looks kind of cool. Not really the best at night, but still looks nice. Under that is a 108 megapixel standard sensor. Yes, 108 megapixels, but the shots come out as 12 megapixel shots. Just like the front camera, you need to toggle it to get the full 108 megapixel goodness, and oh my, is it good. I am surprised because I actually did notice a little bit of a difference between the 12 megapixel and 108 megapixel shots, so 108 megapixels all the way for me, please. With this said, close-up shots are kind of hit or miss. I noticed how the subject would go out of focus even if it is flat, and I kind of noticed that on my OnePlus 7 Pro's 48 megapixel sensor, but this 108 megapixel sensor is much more noticeable. At a distance, everything looks good, like really good. It's just up-close shots need a little bit of work. Another weird thing is that the dual aperture feature that we saw on the S9 and S10 has been dropped from this phone. But at 108 megapixels, it kind of makes sense, and night shots aren't really that bad. Still, this sensor is pretty nice and captures amazing 4K 60 frames per second video, but kind of. Scenery is awesome, but close-up video doesn't really seem to focus properly, and almost kind of seems like you have to do it manually, unless you use a Pro Video option, which focuses fine. It is really annoying, but fun fact, Samsung had Pro Video on the Samsung S8, and they killed it on the Android 8 update. And they never brought it back until the Samsung S20. Kind of annoying and pretty rude if you think about it, but this feature is not new and honestly seems like it's missing some features. The metering mode changer seems to either be erased or hidden, but either way I can't find it on this camera, and I don't get it. Why are you like this, Samsung? This camera does support 8K at what seems like 24 frames per second, but I don't think it's really worth it. Still a nice feature to see if people like that, but I will wait until 8K 60 frames per second comes out on phones in a couple of years. Then the bottom sensor is really weird to me. It's a 48 megapixel telephoto sensor, which sounds awesome and is capable of 100 times space zoom. Now that main part is what most people hear, but it's not really usable. How does this help at all 300 pixels that we see, and this terrible pastel painting looking photo which was made with a stabilizer. Trying to get 100 times shots by hand is super difficult to do, and I never really found a use for it. 30 times is much better, but I think the sweet spot is somewhere between 10 to 20 times zoom. This just means that you can sit at a distance and get the shot you want with a smaller field of view. What confuses me is that these cameras give you 100 times space zoom and 10 times hybrid optical zoom. So I think that the optical zoom is at 4 times because it seems to switch to the telephoto lens at that time. But I'll tell you a little bit more on that later. It's a weird design, but the combination of all these cameras is outrageous. Lastly, you do have the depth vision camera, and just like Samsung, I'll leave it at that. Now here are some extras. It seems that 1080p in 4K 60 frames per second and 8K don't use the telephoto sensor, but 30 frames per second of 1080p or 4K do. And the front camera does focus on video, but only at 30 frames per second. The camera shoots 108 megapixel 3x4 shots, 9 megapixel 16x9 and 1:1 shots, and the full shots, which are 20x9 shots, they are taken at, take a guess, how many megapixels? 7.2 megapixels. Although it seems that the telephoto sensor activates at 4 times zoom, it takes over the whole image at 10 times zoom, seeing that under 10 times zoom gives you an f1.8 shot, while f3.5 is given when it's a 10 times or larger shot. But when taking dimly lit shots, you get f3.5 on anything 5 times or higher, so it's a little confusing. Lastly, single shot sounds good, but here's an example, and it just looks really bad to me. I don't know why Samsung even added this feature, but it's pretty gimmicky for sure. Lastly, 8K video at 16:9 requires a 33.2 megapixel sensor. So in theory, there are 3 sensors on this phone that are capable of 8K, but only one is activated for 8K video. Did I read too much into this camera? Maybe, but there's so much to talk about. Speaking of, is this phone too much? To the average person, the answer is clearly yes. This phone has Ultra in its name, and not Pro, Plus, or Max, for a reason. This is a $1,400 5G phone with an 8K camera, a Snapdragon 865, 12 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, a 5000 milliamp battery, 45 watt charging, reverse wireless charging, IP68 water resistance, a 6.9 inch 120 Hz screen, Wi-Fi 6 ultrasonic fingerprint scanner, memory card support, a 108 megapixel sensor, and so much more. This phone is 220 grams weight-wise, and bigger than pretty much any phone you've ever used, even the Samsung Mega. Okay, it's a little bit smaller than the Mega, but barely. This phone is way more than what a lot of people would want, which is kind of why this phone comes in 2 colors. But for those people that want this phone and think it's worth it, well, the phone exists. The craziest thing to me is that this phone comes with 128 gigabytes of storage and only maxes out at 512 gigabytes, while the Note 10 and Note 10 Plus come with 256 gigabytes standard, and the S10 Plus goes all the way up to 1 terabyte. The nice thing about buying this phone is that there's nothing better than this phone out. Well, at least nothing better that Samsung makes. So should you buy this phone in 2020? At a reasonable price? I would say yes. This is a special Samsung phone. Maybe you can even call it a Halo phone. This is probably the most expensive, reasonable phone that you can buy right now, and I think that's exactly what Samsung was going for. You can already find used versions of this phone for around $1,000 US, and some new ones can be found for $1,200 or lower. At $1,400, it isn't really worth it to me, but if you finance maybe $1,000 over 2 years, it seems like a decent deal. With all this said, this is just a crazy awesome phone. It checks all the boxes except for the low price tag box and the headset jack box, if you still care about both of those. And that's all I wanted to talk about. Thanks for watching my review of the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra 5G, the long name phone for a big deal of a phone. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section or message me on Twitter. I get bored over there. Also, check out my other social media listed above. Subscribe and hit that bell button if you like the channel and want to see more videos. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.